Welcome to Podfellas, where it's just regular guys talking about regular things. Dave, good
What's
morning,
happening?
almost afternoon here. Episode 3. Pretty excited. We've made it this far.
We have. People are actually starting to watch us.
I know.
So now we have to actually be more interesting.
Actually do this and try to be funny and more interesting and have good
All right,
content,
more interesting people.
not just to amuse ourselves.
Yeah.
So you were talking about comedians today, right? And you're a funny
Favorite
guy.
topic of both of ours.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're one of the funniest people that I know. And um, we talk about this all the time on how difficult it is to really be a comedian. And it's one thing to be funny with your buddies, to joke around the campfire while you're smoking cigars and drinking and
Hmm.
busting chops and you have your stories, you have your context, the inside jokes, the things that have happened to you. But it's much different when you're put on the spot. And I think you said right before we jumped on here was like, be funny, make me laugh.
Yeah.
And that's a whole different ballgame right there. And the amount of skill it takes to do that is amazing.
Yeah, I mean, you walk on stage and there's a bunch of people sitting there with their arms crossed, and now you have to make them do something that's involuntary.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to make them laugh. You know what I mean? And that's terrifying. Just in general, speaking in front of people, for a lot of people, is terrifying. But then to get there and make people laugh, and if you're doing poorly, you're going to get booed off the stage. The guys that can do it and the women that can do this consistently,
Mm-hmm.
I give them all the credit in the world, because we've all watched comedians bomb,
Oh yeah,
and it's so uncomfortable and cringy.
it is.
And after a bombing, how do you ever go back on?
It's one of those things, and you and I are both communication guys, and even just your first public speaking in class or whatever. Right. Again, the night before, you're funny with your buddies, they're laughing at your jokes, whatever. And I don't know about you, but I've tried to be funny during. Well, I know you. Of course, you always try to be funny. You are funny,
It doesn't
but
always work.
right. But you try to throw a joke in there that maybe landed the night before, or maybe up here, it's the funniest thing, right? You're
Yeah.
laughing at it,
How
but
many
then
times have you said that was funnier in my head?
it, all the time,
All the
right?
time. Right.
And then now you're on the defense, and now you went off script. It's so difficult to come back, and it takes such practice to do that and such skill, and it is a talent.
Encourage. Encourage.
Encourage.
Oh,
And so there are so many new comedians that are really good at that. And of course there's the classic comedians, right, that we all know and love, the Richard Pryors, the Chappelles,
Eddie
the Rodney
Murphy.
Danger, yeah, Eddie Murphy, the Seinfelds. um, but I think this new batch is really interesting, and you and I talk about this a lot, and it feels like humor is getting edgier, or maybe it's not getting edgier. Maybe those individuals that had that edgy comedy are feeling a little bit okay with being themselves for a variety of reasons.
Well,
But
there's a lot to navigate too, especially when the woke culture come around. People were starting to worry about being canceled, and so you saw a whole different kind of humor. And then you started seeing some comedians push back against that, and that was Chappelle, and that was Bill Burr, and those guys that were like, you know what, I dare you to cancel me, and then they would say the things you're not supposed to say.
right,
And now other comedians, I think, are trying to follow that wake. I think
right,
they're trying to, and some make it work, and some you can see it's forced.
absolutely, and that's the other part of it, right? That forced approach, and where everything is. You have that organic sort of unique humor with context, right? That you can go places, or you can go right to that line and it'll land. But if you're coming at it just to come at it without any context, without any thought to it, or not being organic, and you just want to shock, or
Yeah,
just throw a word out there that everyone's saying now because it's okay to say those words,
Yeah.
9 times out of 10, it's going to either A, get you in trouble, and trouble might not even be canceled, but trouble like, oh, this guy sucks.
Yeah, it's not going to land. That's for sure.
Right.
And
Right.
audiences are smart. I mean, our country, and not every country is this way for comedy. Like, our country loves comedy. Not every place is like that. So
Right.
people really love comedy. They break it down and they watch it. It's hard to fool them. It's hard to, you're not going
Right.
to trick them. Like, if you're doing something and it's not working or it's not funny or it's not genuine,
Right.
audiences, they sniff that out, I think.
Oh, yeah.
That's
Absolutely.
why a guy like, I mean, you got so many different people. You got your people who will say anything.
Mhm.
They're filthy, they're edgy, and I'm not saying that in a bad way. That's just how they do it. Then you got your guy like Nate Bargatze. We were talking to him. He's one of the guys doing it the best right now, and he's totally clean. That's
Yeah.
tough, don't you think?
I mean, everything about his style, because he just looks like, a fella, right?
Yeah,
Just a dude, just a dad at the end of the cul-de-sac. In fact, he has a bit about the cul-de-sac, which is hilarious.
yeah. Which every guy gets that.
Yes, and it's not like always, oh, hey, my wife, or this or that. There's some of that, but it's not too far into that.
Yeah.
He's excellent at it. He has the look. He has the delivery.
Hmm.
He was on SNL, totally killed.
Crushed.
I mean,
Absolutely crushed. The George Washington skit, still one of the funniest things I've seen in years on there.
absolutely.
And his aw shucks, big eyed, confused delivery is, I think, what makes it work. He'll be telling you he's somewhere and this crazy thing's happening, and he's like, I didn't know, and that for whatever. I mean, he makes him so relatable and so disarming that
Right.
you can just listen to him. I mean, he's naturally funny. Now you've got these other guys who are also excellent. We both are big fans of Theo Vaughn.
Oh,
Theo Vaughn,
hilarious.
when he does his stand up, he's the one guy who, when he's on a podcast, he sounds the same.
Absolutely.
He's organically funny. He's a guy that could sit and read the phone book and be funny because his delivery is just funny.
Right.
And there's nothing else he could have ever done in his life but be a comedian
No, and
because he's hysterical.
and I don't know if I mean, I'm sure he writes some things down, but it also feels like he's very reactive, and he's that friend that's funny, that all the time will say something so outlandish and funny, but then he won't even laugh at his own stuff. It's that good. Like, and he'll just keep going. But he's one of those rare comedians that can take that, hey, just hanging out with your buddies, and still be that guy on stage. So I'm sure he writes something down. I'm sure he practices.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, it feels so natural
It does.
that, and so outlandish, that it just, it's past sort of that stream of consciousness kind of thing, because he does weave in stories, and
He does. He weaves in these crazy stories and he tells you things about, and he'll just be like, one time we had this guy, and he'll go into it, and his delivery is hysterical. Like he said, I was watching me the other night, and he said something like, I got bit by a gay guy the other day, so we'll see. And it's like, wait a minute.
exactly.
What does that even mean? And then he just goes on to the next thing. He'll just say these little tidbits,
Yep.
and you almost never see him laugh at his own joke.
No.
And now some comedians do laugh their joke, like Shane Gillis. He's, again, brilliant, but he and Mark Normand, they'll
Yeah.
tell a joke and they'll be like, ha ha,
Yeah.
that's their style. Whereas a guy like Nate, you'll never hear him do that. He's wide-eyed and confused. Why are you guys laughing at me? I just told you this terrible thing that happened to me.
Right.
And that's the genius and they're all different, yet they're all wildly, successful.
And it's also the timing of that, allowing your audience to react. That is the toughest part. And I do this at home, right? I'll say something funny. At least to me, it's hilarious. I know you would laugh, right?
Yeah.
I know Browner would laugh. Shout out to Browner, right?
Brown.
Um, but like my wife, I will have to laugh and I'll say, that was funny. Like, hey, let me, and then now I'm explaining why that was funny.
Yeah, and that never works.
That never works, at least with my wife. But
No, well, my wife has told me she's been inoculated against the funny, like to this point. Like the things that I think are funny,
yeah,
she's so over it that the most I'll get sometimes from her is, that was funny.
yeah,
I'm like, that's all I get. I don't even get a giggle, a cackle. But I
yeah,
think maybe if, I'm also the guy who, forgot to pick up my socks or, messed up the kitchen too. So I get it.
yeah,
But the back to these comedians who, like, some guys on stage are amazing.
hmm
Then you see them on a podcast and they're just okay.
right.
Uh, and other guys are almost better on the podcast because they're so organically funny. And I think, like, Jerry Seinfeld was famously like almost a scientist about it, like figuring out what works. So when he gets on stage, like, he's a stand-up comedian. That's all he wants to be. He's not a big podcast guy. He's not a big interview guy. He's, that's his thing. Where some of these other guys, like you see a Cat Williams on stage, he's just as funny in an interview.
Yeah,
Like
absolutely.
on some pod, he was on I think Shannon Sharp's show.
Hilarious.
He was unbelievably funny. He was on with Theo Vaughn. He was unbelievably funny. He's just a naturally funny guy. And is that something cultivated or is that a gift?
I think that's a gift, to be
I
honest.
think so too.
I think it's raw talent like anything else that if you practice it, like if you're, a good athlete or something and you continue to work at it or an artist, a true artist. So, you can look at the progression of somebody's art over the years and they practice at it and they get better with their skills and
Yeah.
it becomes effortless. Um, Looking for new techniques, trying out new material. And look, this is something I think secret, there's a couple, if I could do it over again or in my next life, I always thought it would be because my friends, oh, dude, you're so funny, this and that, and I can make people laugh. And but the one or two times that I tried to float something out there, uh, it may have gotten some positive feedback. But again, back to the beginning of the conversation here, it always sounds better in my head and it takes a lot of practice. So like, for example, if you go like on a Kill Tony, I would never put my name in because even if I thought I had the best stuff in the world, the amount of pressure, I mean, you're up there with just absolute killers.
Yeah.
Um,
You watch
and
Dying on the Vine. It's hard to
yeah,
watch some of it.
yeah, some of it. And there are some regulars on there that are just your next batch of top comedians. I mean, it's amazing. Um,
Yeah,
but
you see that too. That guy around his office or around his friends is probably the funniest guy in the room.
mhm,
And he got on there, and you just watch his stuff not working, watch
right,
him die, and it's very interesting. In fact, uh, I was listening to Richard Pryor one time talk about comedians, and one of the people he threw out as one of the greats, which surprised me, was Rodney Dangerfield.
mhm,
He said, Rodney Dangerfield's the only guy I know that can actually tell a joke. He goes, most of us tell stories.
interesting.
Rodney told jokes,
Yes,
and he would go to another joke and another joke. That's the kind of thing normally you boot off stage. So why did it work for Rodney? And he said he had something special that he could come out and say, I got water under my knee, so my doctor gave me a sponge. Now that's not
right,
that funny, but he made it work somehow. And he figured, and he blew up. He wasn't even famous till he was like in his mid 40s,
right,
you
right.
know, and somehow then the second half of his life, he was like one of the most famous comedians ever. In his early 40s, he was still driving a delivery truck,
Yeah.
and then he figured something out. So I guess never too late, for these guys too.
No, no.
It's not like a pro athlete where your past is over, or you hurt your leg.
Right.
You can be hysterical the whole way through. For me, possibly the funniest person for me was Norm Macdonald, the late great Norm Macdonald.
Absolutely.
But everyone didn't get his stuff, and he's been known to bomb. In fact, they said when he would bomb, he would go to the door and shake everyone's hand and thank them for coming after he bombed, because he was weird and he liked that kind of thing. I always think that was very funny.
Which in and of itself is funny, and almost then you leave there. I mean, think about the genius behind that. You leave there if I'm shaking his hand, you're almost like, okay, was this a part of the whole bit? Him bombing, shaking my hand, thank you for
Yeah.
coming. Now all of a sudden you have to think about the genius behind that.
Was
Or
he
the
that big
ability,
ahead?
right,
Kind of stuff Andy Kaufman used to do.
right.
Like he was into fooling the audience, and that in itself is kind of what was Norm bombing on purpose? It's possible.
Right.
I mean, you heard about him getting kicked out of Iowa, the state of Iowa. He was speaking at a college, and they told him before they went on, him and I think there was, I think it was, there was two other comedians there, and they were also told to go clean. They're like, okay, they do their clean stuff, they do their clean stuff. Norm come on, didn't like being told to be clean, and went as filthy as he could.
Of course.
He had a police escort off the campus after the show was over, and was taken. It was escorted to the state lines apparently, and the governor told him he wasn't allowed in Iowa. I don't know for how long or something, but for Norm, he wanted to do that. To him, that was funnier than doing a good set.
Right. Because you could talk about a good set, but then you talk about something so big like that that it keeps repeating.
But yeah,
That's the other thing too. When you talk about comedians and the ability to, and we do this with quotes and quotable things or episodes. No matter how many times you bring it up or you say it. For example, Chappelle's a master at this, right?
mm-hmm.
You can quote Chappelle all the time. Charlie Murphy and all these different things. Well, that's Charlie Murphy, but the Chappelle show in general. And even if you say things like shirts versus skins, making pancakes, if you're a fan, you kind of get all of that, and that lives on. And just even those little snippets, that's the other thing. If you could take one or two words from someone's bit or set, whatever, and then everyone knows what you're talking about, and then relive and bond over that, which is hilarious. That is the sign of somebody great too, because I think Chappelle, at least in my friend group and our friend group, is probably one of the top, and I think everyone I talk to.
Yeah.
Now, Seinfeld, yeah, we talk. Oh, remember that Seinfeld? Or this reminds me of Seinfeld. Sure.
Well, that sitcom was just unbelievable.
Right.
Now to live forever.
Right. But then there are some that are just sort of like another one that I've never quoted. I couldn't even tell you a joke other than the story you told about being the machine, and that would be Bert Kreischer. And I'm sure he's hilarious with his friends, and I'm sure he was the guy with the lampshade on his head.
Yeah.
And pounding beers, and somehow, some way, he got in, and it just went, and he's had to keep up that persona for so long. But he has a following, but I couldn't tell you one joke. I couldn't repeat a one-liner that he says.
Not memorable. What you remember is he doesn't have a shirt on, and he's drank 48 beers the night before, and he's red-faced. You remember his look more than his lines. Whereas some of these lines, like for me, one of the best stand-up routines I ever saw in my life was Dave Chappelle. It was called Killing Them Softly. It was one of his first major ones. For me, that's still the standard. That's one of the funniest ones ever. I can quote 20 things from that, and I've not seen it in a while. That is when a guy, he figured it out. He figured out, like, that lives in your brain. When you're the next day telling what the guy said and you're telling the joke again to somebody. Now, with Bert, you're not doing that because I don't remember what he said the day before. You know what I mean?
No.
Not that he's bad. It's just different. It's a very different thing.
Right. And
you're watching his show for a different reason than you're watching maybe some other guy. Maybe that's the best way to explain it.
I watch it to feel better about my alcohol consumption because I figure,
Yeah,
oh, he's successful, and
I'm
I'm
not doing
fine.
so bad. He's. I can take my shirt off the beach. He's doing it on stage. I guess it's okay. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
I'm with you. I'm with you. Some of these comedians too will talk about how just the tiniest tweak in a phrase can make it funny. I heard Kevin Hart. I think it was Kevin Hart talking about it, and he was saying if you yell at your kids and you say, "I've already told you 40 times not to do that," that's not as funny as "I have told you 47 times not to do that." The weird odd number makes it funnier.
Yes,
And all these guys know, like, I mean, it goes down as simple as your verb and your adverb placement in a sentence
absolutely,
can make something funny or not.
absolutely, and that's true. The odd numbers, the
Mm-hmm.
random things in there. And I, again, you and I talk a lot about our families, and we're always trying to get a laugh. And I might, in the middle of me being a dad, and maybe saying something like, who didn't put the bread away? And then I'll see an opportunity to be funny in there. This is why I have zero credibility at home with
Yeah, yeah.
my kids, because I'll say something about the bread, and then I'll say something like, bread doesn't grow on trees. It's,
Yeah,
to me, that's funny. It's a dad joke,
yeah, it's a dad joke.
but it's just thrown in there like, wait, money doesn't bread, of course,
Hey,
and then
and
and
then
it's just
if you start explaining it, it's over.
it's over. But to me, it was funny because it's like, oh, what silly thing can I throw in here?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's just like last week. I was sitting with a group of people that we know, and we were at a fairly, it was an event for our kids. And I was sitting there, and the one lady said, "How'd you meet your wife?" And I said, "Oh, I've known her my whole life," which is true because we met when we were kids.
Uh,
Um, and she said, "Oh, really?" And I said, "Oh, yeah, I've known her forever." I said, "We're second cousins." And then right after that, someone come over and needed me, and I was like, "Oh, excuse me," and I left. My wife was like 2 hours later said, "Did you tell so and so we're cousins?" I said, "Oh shoot, I
you
forgot
got
to say, oh, I'm only kidding." And I thought, most people would know I'm joking, but apparently not. So,
now knowing you though,
and then
did
I
you
had to go
follow?
back to her later and say, "Oh no, we're not really cousins. I'm sorry. Hope you're not thinking we're creepy now." And how often do you throw one out there that doesn't either doesn't land or the person doesn't get this? I mean, it was dripping with sarcasm, but everyone doesn't see sarcasm.
I'm surprised, knowing you, I'm surprised you didn't go back like, yeah, we're not second cousins, we're first cousins.
Hmm.
Like I'm surprised you didn't double down on it, but
I'm like, yeah, we're actually first cousins, but I
yeah,
thought that would be weird,
yeah, yeah.
when I first met you. Yeah, and more than once, my wife has come up and said, "Please stop telling people." I was at her class reunion one time, and every single person I met, and everyone was hammered, and I didn't want to be there that bad. And every single person I met, I was telling them what I did for a living, and I was a dog groomer. I had all these crazy jobs, and I told everybody something different. And she was like, "Why do you keep doing that?" I said, "I'm having a great time." You know, the next
People
thing,
coming up,
the
people
next
coming up
thing
to her,
she went alone.
yeah, people coming up to her like, oh, tell Dave that I'll drop the dog off tomorrow. That
Yeah, I'll tell them in a dog grooming game. I'm in
yeah.
recycling. I'm in this and that. I mean, because if I'm being dragged to this, I'm going to enjoy it. There's an open bar. I'm going to have a good time.
Well, that's something. That's something else that I sometimes I will tell jokes or I will say something knowing no one else is around. So, for example, I'll give you a quick example. I used to work with this woman, and without giving away too much, she would always come over, and she was very serious, always very serious, never laughed at any jokes or never. I always was trying to break the ice or trying to add a little levity to the situation, which some people love and some people probably find it extremely annoying. She was a project manager for an IT company. Well, there you go. Not much, not much going on other than like you're late on this project kind of thing,
Right.
right? So I remember she was telling me about her husband losing weight, or trying to lose weight. And I said, "Oh, has he tried the Garth Brooks juice diet?" Now, So I Married an Axe Murderer is one of my favorite movies ever.
Mike Myers.
And the mom, the Mike Myers' mom in there talks about Garth Brooks juice diet. And so I just threw that in there
Such a
because
random nugget.
I needed to be I needed to be entertained. Like I had to entertain myself in that situation.
Absolutely.
And so out of context, I mean, I thought it was hilarious. Now I'm able to tell that story again. And some people are like, "Oh, that's funny." But for me, it was like I needed something to entertain myself in that situation.
Yeah.
Because if I heard about another Gantt chart, I was going to jump out the window. Um, but it was just one of those things. And then the response for her was like, "No, I'll have to tell him about that." So I could only imagine where that landed when if she brought. She goes, "I worked with this guy. He said that you
Yeah.
should really try the Garth Brooks juice diet." And he's like,
Who the
"What?"
hell's this guy telling me what
Yeah,
to do?
yeah. And then if he looks it up and you see, she never came back and acknowledged it, but I thought it was funny and it entertained me. And to this day, it entertained me. That was 15 years ago. So,
Yeah, well, and that's the ones that live rent free in your brain forever. I was in a meeting one time, and we were sitting there, and it was a very serious meeting and somber. There was going to be all these cuts, and all this was happening, and it was not a good meeting. We all knew going into it was no meeting. So we sit there, and the boss comes in and lays out like for 10 minutes all the things we're going to have to do to make things work.
mhm.
And then at the end, everyone's just looking around all mad. And he says, "Now, does anyone have any questions?" And I said, "Yeah, I have a question. What is it?" And I said, "Am I to understand that we're all brought here and there's going to be no donuts in this meeting?" He's dead silent for a few seconds. And I thought, okay, it didn't land. I'm going to get fired. And then slowly it spread and it broke the tension. And then we all laughed. And then that became the joke. And over the next 10 years, every meeting, someone will be like, "Are we having donuts?" That became like stupid. And for every time I hit one like that landed, it probably 10 that didn't.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I hear you. You're like the I'm trying to. You're like the Jim Thome, where you're hitting a home run,
Right.
walking or striking out. You're
A
not
fan.
the Rod Carew where you're just banging out singles all the time. Now, I'm just using
No.
that example, but
Yeah, you're not plunking one over the
funny guy.
shortstop's head. You're either going for it or you're not.
I threw out Jim Thome and Rod Carew.
Both Hall of Famers, very different players.
Yeah, absolutely. But again, just to reiterate, I think you're hilarious because I don't want offline you get all like hurt and stuff because I know how you can
No,
get.
yeah, I don't want to be all the Jones mean to me today. But like when we talk about just organic humor, like when I'm around people who have no sense of humor, I actually struggle
Oh, in a big way.
because if I'm with people and I throw out a little one liner that's even moderately funny, and I get, "What did you mean by that?" or this quizzical look, I'm like, okay, you're not my people. I I love being around a group of people that are telling funny stories, doing funny things, not taking things so serious. And I think for me
Right.
the reason is life is very, can be very hard.
Sure.
Let's not make it harder than it needs to be. So there's something very therapeutic and healing about laughing. I love to laugh. That's why you and we talk about this. We watch stand-up comedians all the time. We watch podcasts all the time. And we watch funny people doing funny things.
Yeah.
Because just laughing, it produces more endorphins. It makes you feel better.
Right.
I'd rather be around people like that.
Absolutely. It's what makes it it makes like you said, it makes life interesting and it takes the pressure off of the daily whatever you're going through.
Like
One thing that
David Spade's a perfect example. He got a group of guys together, and they didn't talk politics. They just sat there and told funny stories to each other, and
that
it
was
was a
it.
great 30-minute show.
Hmm.
You remember that?
I do. And it's now you had some heavy hitters on there, but even
Yeah.
just sort of how we are here and what we've been trying to, we've discussed what, what Podfellas is going to be and
Mhm.
casual conversations, just, average guys talking about average things, whatever tagline we want to put on it.
Yeah.
But it is challenging because you do have to sort of balance of like, all right, am I going to go all in on this and that? But I think as we continue down this path here, and the kind of individuals that are, in my opinion, pod fellas are somebody or individuals that can have some kind of humor. It doesn't have to always be humor. You
No.
certainly, I mean, who knows where this will end up? You might have, who knows, you have some serious subject matter, whatever. But at the end of the day, I think we're all looking for some kind of escape from whatever it is we're trying to escape, right? In a
The
healthy,
grind. Yeah.
fun way.
I mean, if you can get a little escape, a real respite, um, just sometimes I'll just watch a couple funny reels if I have a little bit of time, say in between meetings or something, or I'm in my car. I'll throw a reel on and I'll listen to just a couple funny little stories or whatever. I don't know, puts me in a little bit better frame of mind.
Absolutely.
Particularly when there is so much serious stuff in the world. You and I have already said we're not big politic guys. We're not, you know, we're looking at what do you talk about when you sit around with your friends?
Hmm.
That's what we do.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
and as guests come on here, they're going to help shape this.
Right.
We want this to be a place for anyone to come in and share some things and what's important to you. And I think that will help shape the direction of where we go with this.
I love it. And like anything else, go to the website, podfellas.com, comment, like, share. We'll have a poll here um, with some questions. And thank you those who have downloaded and listened and followed and commented because, again, organically here is just seeing where this goes and gives us something to do here. You and I are both in our early 30s, so we're just looking for something to do the rest of our life. So,
That's it.
um, you know,
That's it. And when the polls come out, you're going to be they'll be relevant to whatever we were talking about. We'd love to hear your thoughts on that, and we're always looking for subject matter. If you have things that you don't think are getting discussed enough, drop us a line and let us know what you want, what you think is interesting to talk about. Joe and I'll talk about anything. We have nothing else to do.
little do people know we have literally nothing else to do. All right, next time I'm going to DoorDash some donuts so we can have some donuts during the
Yeah,
podcast.
donuts. I'm not on donuts in a meeting is really it's
That
really
could be an office crime. We talked about the last episodes. We talked about having donuts and what people do. I
yeah.
think the absence of donuts is an office crime.
If you don't have donuts and coffee, what do you expect people to do for 2 hours? Pay attention? Please.
Absolutely not. All right, Dave. Thanks, brother. We will be
Next
back. All right, man. Take care. Thanks. Thank you for listening to Podfellas. If you are interested in becoming a Podfella, visit our site, podfellas.com, and fill out the request form.